They say the best revenge is living well. But $13 million doesn't hurt either. When Charles proposed, everyone said we were made for each other. They had no idea how right they were, just not for the reasons they thought. You see, I'd been watching the Whitmore family for 8 months before Charles ever knew my name. But let me back up. Because the real story starts with my mother sitting in our cramped kitchen in Queens, staring at another stack of bills she couldn't pay. Listen to me carefully, she said, her voice steady despite the tears. Love is a luxury we can't afford. Security first. Everything else is just poetry. I was 14. My father had just left us for his secretary, a woman with better teeth and a trust fund. Mom was working 3 jobs to keep our lights on. That night I made myself a promise. I would never be that desperate. Ever. 8 months ago, everything started innocently enough. The research started innocent enough. I was working at a small gallery in Soho, cataloging estates for wealthy families, disposing of their art collections. That's how I first encountered the Whitmore name. Charles's great-aunt was selling off some minor impressionist pieces, but it was the casual conversation with the estate lawyer that caught my attention. Shame about young Charles, he'd mentioned while reviewing paperwork. Brilliant kid, but he can't touch his real money until he settles down. Old Jonathan was paranoid about keeping the fortune in proper hands. My ears pricked up. In my world, information was currency. I started small. Public records, social media, charity event guest lists, society pages going back 5 years. Charles Whitmore III emerged like a photograph in developing solution. 28, single, oil money stretching back to the 1920s. Trust fund locked behind what appeared to be marriage requirements. More importantly, a pattern. He dated artists, writers, women from outside his social circle. Always the same type, brunette, educated, financially vulnerable. Relationships that lasted exactly long enough to get serious, then ended abruptly with generous, parting gifts. I spent 3 months building a complete profile. By month 6, I knew which events he attended, which galleries he favored, even which coffee shop he frequented near his office. By month 8, I was ready to hunt. The night of the Whitmore Charity Gala changed everything. Standing by the Monet reproduction, I waited. Patience is everything when you're fishing for sharks. Terrible reproduction, came the voice I'd been expecting. Bored. Expensive education evident in every syllable. I turned slowly, offering the right mixture of surprise and shy interest. The brushwork is passable, but they completely miss the light quality. It's like looking at Monet through dirty glass. Charles Whitmore III. Exactly as handsome as his photos suggested, with the kind of confidence that comes from never doubting your place in the world. You know your art, he said, moving into my carefully planned conversation space. Columbia didn't let us graduate without learning to spot forgeries. True, except for the Columbia part. Charles Whitmore, he said, extending a manicured hand. Isabella Langford? The lie rolled off my tongue like silk. Would you like to see the real Monet? I know where they keep the authentic pieces. Hook, line, sinker. Over the next 3 months, Charles was exactly what I'd expected. Charming when he wanted something. Generous when it served his purposes. Dismissive in small ways that revealed his true character. I played my part flawlessly. Grateful but not desperate. Intelligent but not threatening. Independent enough to be interesting. Vulnerable enough to be manageable. 2 months into dating, I heard the conversation that changed everything. I was in his kitchen making coffee when his voice carried from the study. She's ideal for this. He was telling someone, Uncle Richard, I'd learn later. Artistic background, no family money, completely smitten with the lifestyle. She'll be grateful for whatever arrangement we make. A chill ran down my spine. When are you thinking? Richard's voice tinny through the phone speaker. Soon. The lawyers say I need to be married before 30 to access the full trust. That gives us 18 months, but why wait? And after we'll see how things develop. If she adapts well to the family, maybe we stay married. If not. Charles's laugh was like broken glass. Prenup's bulletproof. She'll walk away comfortable but not wealthy. That night I bought a digital recorder. Small enough to hide. Good enough to capture clear audio. I never got another conversation quite that explicit, but I didn't need one. That single exchange told me everything I needed to know about Charles Whitmore's intentions. 1 month later, he proposed at the Met in front of the Degas dancers. Romantic. Public. Impossible to refuse without causing a scene. "Isabella," he said, dropping to one knee while tourists snapped photos. "You've brought beauty into every corner of my life. Will you marry me?" The ring was spectacular. 3 carats flawless, probably worth more than my mother made in 5 years. "Yes," I whispered, letting tears spring to my eyes. "Oh God, yes," the tourists applauded. Charles slipped the ring onto my finger with hands that trembled slightly from excitement, or nerves, I couldn't tell. Later in the cab back to his apartment, he was on the phone immediately. "It's done," he told Richard. "Wedding in 4 months. Everything should be settled before my birthday." 4 months. I had 4 months to figure out how to protect myself. "I can't wait," I said, and meant it completely. A few weeks later, we were invited to family dinner at the Whitmore estate. "You're exactly what this family needs," Caroline Whitmore announced over the second course. Pretty, smart, safe. We were dining at the Whitmore estate in Connecticut. Everything mahogany and crystal old money whispering its superiority from every corner. Charles squeezed my hand. "Mother, please don't embarrass Isabella." "I'm not embarrassing anyone, darling. I'm stating facts." Caroline's smile was all teeth. "You've chosen well. She'll fit in beautifully." That word again. Safe. I'd heard her use it in hushed phone conversations. Thank God Charles found someone safe. After that disaster with the Volkov girl, the Russian, another piece clicking into place. "I just want Charles to be happy," I said softly. "Of course you do, dear." "And Charles will be very happy once his inheritance comes through properly." Caroline turned to me with predatory interest. "Has he explained about our family traditions?" Charles shifted uncomfortably. "Mother, don't be modest. Isabella needs to understand how these things work." Caroline's eyes glittered. "Old families have old rules, you see. Charles can't access his full inheritance until he's married to someone appropriate. Appropriate, suitable, safe. All words that meant the same thing, controllable. I nodded like this was fascinating news instead of information I'd been researching for months. Like something from a Jane Austen novel. I murmured. "Exactly." Caroline clapped her hands. "You do understand beautifully." In the car afterward, Charles apologized. "She gets carried away about family history. The inheritance thing is just legal formalities." "Of course," I said, stroking his ego. "Tradition is important, but I was already planning my next move. 2 months before the wedding, the Whitmores threw us an engagement party that rivaled small country budgets. Crystal chandeliers, champagne that cost more per bottle than my mother's monthly rent, and a guest list that read like a Forbes directory. I moved through the crowd, collecting intelligence. Every conversation was reconnaissance. Every laugh was performance. Charles's sister Susan cornered me by the bar around 11, already deep into her cups. "God, you're gorgeous," she slurred, swaying slightly. "How do you stay so flawless I'd kill for your cheekbones?" "Good genes," I lied smoothly. "Lucky thing, I have to practically starve myself to fit into anything decent." She gestured at her designer dress with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. "Speaking of family genetics, did you know our grandfather was completely neurotic about gold diggers?" My heart started racing, but I kept my expression mildly curious. "Oh, after what happened with his first wife. She cleaned him out and ran off to Monaco in the 60s. Susan giggled, nearly spilling her champagne. "So he rewrote the will with all these paranoid protection clauses. Something about punishing anyone who marries for money by giving the spouse a huge chunk of whatever inheritance they unlock. Twisted old bastard thought he was so clever." Susan wandered off toward the dessert table, leaving me standing there with the first real piece of the puzzle. I excused myself to the powder room, locked the door, and stared at my reflection. The same face that had been playing this game for months. But now I saw something different in my eyes. Not just hunger, opportunity. The following Monday morning, I knew I needed professional help. Her law firm occupied 52 floors of intimidation in Midtown Manhattan, all black leather and sharp edges designed to make opposing counsel sweat. "I need a consultation about inheritance law," I told her assistant. Margaret herself was 5 feet of pure legal intellect, wrapped in a suit that could cut glass. "What specifically about inheritance law?" she asked, studying me over reading glasses that probably cost more than my engagement ring. "I'm marrying into a family with complex trust structures. I want to understand what I'm walking into." Something shifted in Margaret's expression. Recognition. She'd seen this before: young women walking into marriages they didn't fully comprehend. Smart. Too many people sign papers without reading them. "What family?" "Whitmore." Now Margaret's eyebrows rose. "The Oil Whitmores. That's not complex, that's Byzantine. I'll need until Thursday to research this properly." Thursday afternoon, Margaret called back with news that would change everything. "Possibly both. Tell me." The Whitmore Trust contains a 1962 addendum called the Matrimonial Integrity Clause. Jonathan Whitmore Sr. added it after his first wife, Elena, took him for exactly 11% of his fortune and disappeared to Monaco with her tennis instructor. He was upset about it, devastated, and vindictive. Here's the crucial part: the clause states that if any Whitmore descendant marries primarily for financial gain, the spouse automatically receives 11% of any inheritance unlocked within 180 days of the marriage ceremony. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. "Is it enforceable?" "Completely. It's triggered automatically when 2 conditions are met: inheritance access within the time frame, plus documented evidence of the descendant's financial motivation for marriage." I thought about my digital recorder, that one crucial conversation I'd captured. What constitutes sufficient evidence? Recorded conversations discussing financial motivation would be more than adequate. The beauty of this clause is that it doesn't matter how much of the trust gets unlocked. 11% comes from the total trust value, not just what's accessed. "What's the total value?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Current valuation is approximately $120 million. 11% would be just over $13 million. $13 million. I had to sit down. Based on your questions." Margaret continued, "I'm assuming you have such evidence. Hypothetically that someone would be looking at a very comfortable future. The last 2 months before the wedding became an exercise in controlled performance. Every conversation with Charles was theater. Every family dinner was reconnaissance. Charles grew increasingly relaxed as the date approached, like a man seeing the finish line of a long race. "Just think," he said one evening over dinner, "in 3 weeks everything will be different. Different how I asked innocently. Secure, stable, we'll be able to plan for the future properly. The future. Where I would be quietly divorced within 2 years and paid enough to disappear without fuss. I can't wait," I said, and meant it completely. Charles had grown comfortable enough that he rarely discussed business around me anymore. It didn't matter. I had what I needed. Our wedding day arrived like the climax of a perfectly orchestrated performance. The kind of extravagant affair that makes other rich people sick with envy. I walked down the aisle in Italian silk, carrying white roses flown in from Ecuador, smiling at 200 guests who saw exactly what they expected: a grateful young woman marrying up. Charles looked devastating in his custom tuxedo. When he took my hands at the altar, his were steady, confident. "Do you, Charles Jonathan Whitmore III, take Isabella to be your wife?" "I do." "Clear and strong. Do you, Isabella Langford, take Charles to be your husband?" I looked into his eyes, saw the calculation behind the affection, the timeline behind the tenderness. "I do." When we kissed, the guests erupted. Rice and petals fell like celebration. The photographer captured it all. The beautiful moment, the beautiful lie. But I was thinking about Elena, the woman who'd inspired the very weapon that would destroy her husband's grandson. Some revenge takes generations to ripen. We honeymooned in Tuscany, 2 weeks of wine and carefully maintained facades. 2 weeks of candlelit dinners, and Charles playing the devoted husband while mentally counting inheritance money. He was different after the ceremony. Relaxed. Like he'd accomplished something difficult and could finally breathe. "I love you, Mrs. Whitmore," he'd say over dinner, reaching for my hand. "I love you too." I'd reply, wondering if either of us believed it anymore. He was careful about phone calls now, but on our last night I heard him speaking quietly on the terrace. "Everything's ready," he was telling Richard. "Should transfer within days of our return. Soon, very soon." When we returned to New York, everything moved with mechanical precision. By Thursday, Charles was signing papers. By the following Monday, he had accessed his inheritance, $45 million, flowing directly to his personal accounts. Tuesday morning, my phone rang. "It's done," Margaret said. The matrimonial integrity clause triggered automatically at 9 a.m. $13.2 million has been transferred to a trust in your name. I sank into Charles's leather sofa, our sofa, my hands shaking as I processed the number. Irrevocable. Completely. Jonathan Whitmore Sr. was very thorough. Once triggered, the clause cannot be reversed, contested, or modified. The 11% is calculated from the total trust value, not what your husband accessed. $13 million. More money than I'd dreamed possible. Charles had handed it to me by being exactly the person his grandfather had written the clause to punish. The confrontation I'd been dreading came that evening. Did you know no greeting, just accusation? Know what? About the clause. About what would happen when I accessed the inheritance. I studied his face. For months he'd been my target. My means to an end. Now he just looked like a man discovering that actions have consequences. "I knew you were lying to me," I said calmly. "I knew you were using me. I knew you planned to discard me after taking what you needed." His face went pale. "You recorded me. You discussed defrauding me. I documented it for my own protection. This is entrapment. This is your grandfather's will, which you might have known about if you'd read beyond the inheritance amounts." Charles stared at me like I was a stranger. "I loved you." The words hung between us like smoke from something that had already burned down. "No," I said, "you loved my usefulness. But that wasn't the end of our story. It was barely the beginning." Charles sat down heavily, putting his face in his hands. When he looked up, there was something different in his eyes, not desperation. Relief. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" He said, his voice completely different. Cold, calculating. "Do you think I didn't read my own grandfather's will?" I felt the world tilt. "What?" Elena Volkov. June 1961. I've known that story since I was 12 years old. Charles stood, walked to the bookshelf, pulled out an old photo album. "Want to know why I called you safe?" He opened to the first page. A photograph of a beautiful woman, dark hair, intelligent eyes. She looked disturbingly like me. "Elena had the same type as you. Smart, determined, forced by circumstances." Charles sat down across from me. But there was one difference. Elena had no idea about the clause. I felt my blood freeze. "But you did. I've read every page of that will since I was 15. Every clause, every addendum, including something called the Matrimonial Integrity Clause." His eyes never left mine. I knew exactly what would happen when I accessed the inheritance. "Why?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Because I hate this family." For the first time, I heard real emotion in Charles's voice. They turned me into a money-making machine, never asked what I wanted, only cared about legacy and tradition. He stood, walked to the window. "When I met you, I knew immediately you were hunting me. The way you asked about art. The way you coincidentally appeared at places I frequented. You were good, but not better than someone who'd been watching this family his entire life. I felt like I'd been slapped. So everything was real." Charles turned back. "Those calls with Richard, I knew you were listening. I wanted you to listen. I needed you to have evidence to trigger the clause. Why not trigger it yourself? Because I needed an ally. Someone as smart as you. Someone who understood what it felt like to be used." He sat down beside me. I needed someone who would never let them forget this lesson. I looked at him, searching for lies. But for the first time, Charles's eyes were completely honest. "So how did you feel about me?" I asked. At first sympathy, then admiration. Finally. He took my hand. "Love. Real love." We sat in silence, two manipulators who had found each other. "So what now?" I asked. "Now we decide if we want to be partners or enemies." 3 days after Margaret's first call, the phone rang again. This time her voice carried a different kind of urgency. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "I need to see you immediately." An hour later, I sat in Margaret's office watching her flip through pages of documents. "I dug deeper," Margaret said. "There's a second clause, added in 1963, 1 year after the Elena incident." My stomach dropped. "What clause?" "The fraud discovery clause. If the spouse also married primarily for financial motivation, and this is proven within 2 years, the entire amount reverts to the family. The spouse receives nothing." My blood turned to ice. How could they prove that? Private investigation, financial records, personal history. Margaret looked directly into my eyes. "Who is Isabella Langford really?" I couldn't answer. That's what I thought. "You created a false identity, which means they can prove you married under false pretenses with intent to defraud. But Charles also deceived. Doesn't matter. This clause protects the family from sophisticated predators. It was written specifically to deal with people like you." I felt my world collapsing. "Is there any way out?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "There's one way, but you won't like it. Tell me. You have to prove genuine feelings, clearly, undeniably. How? Stay with Charles, really stay, build a real life with him, or—" Margaret paused. "Or what? Or you have to destroy all evidence of your true identity. Permanently. Become Isabella Langford completely." I looked out the window, saw Charles standing outside the building. He knew I was here, knew about this meeting. Maybe he also knew about the second clause. "How long do I have?" I asked. 2 years from the wedding date. But if they start investigating now— Margaret checked her watch. "Maybe a few months." When I left the building, Charles was waiting. "You know about the second clause?" I asked. "Did you think I wouldn't read the entire will?" He smiled, but it wasn't happy. "The question is, what do you want to do now?" I looked at him, realizing I stood at a crossroads: run and lose everything, stay and risk it all, or play an entirely new game. "We need to talk," I said. "I agree," Charles replied. And this time no one lies. That night we sat in Charles's apartment for what felt like the first honest conversation of our entire relationship. Two real people finally meeting each other. "I know you're Emma Sullivan from Queens," Charles said. "Your mother cleans office buildings for Goldman Sachs. You had a full scholarship to State University, not Columbia." I wasn't surprised anymore. "How long have you known?" "Second week we were dating. I hired a private investigator to check your background." Charles poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "But instead of sending you away, I decided to see how far you'd go." "Why?" "Because for the first time in my life, I met someone who played this game better than me." He handed me a glass. "You fascinated me. Not the fake Isabella Langford. The real Emma Sullivan." I took a sip, tasting the bitterness. "So what now? Will you report the second clause to your family?" "No." Charles sat down across from me. "I'm going to protect you." "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for you staying. Really staying. Not for money, but for— possibility." I frowned. "What possibility?" "That we could actually love each other, if we stop lying." After hours of talking, we'd moved from adversaries to something I'd never expected: actual partners. "Do you have any ideas?" Charles asked. I'd been thinking about this the entire way back. "We make them believe we really love each other. Completely convincingly. How? We don't get divorced. We build a real life. Have children. Become a power couple." I looked straight into his eyes. "And we slowly destroy this family from the inside." Charles laughed genuinely for the first time. "You want to turn them into their own enemies. I want to make them dependent on us, then use that power to change everything." "Like what?" "Turn Whitmore Oil into a renewable energy company. Use that money to fund education for poor children. Make everything they represent become good." Charles was silent, thinking. "That's perfect revenge. Turn their legacy into everything they hate most." "Exactly. But there's one condition." He took my hand. "If we do this, we have to really try. Love each other for real. No more pretending." I looked down at his hand holding mine. For the first time, I felt warmth. "Okay," I said. But if you betray me, you'll kill me. No, I'll make you the poorest man in Manhattan. Charles laughed. Deal. 2 years later, our plan had succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. This quarter we funded 300 scholarships, I said, and the Texas wind farm goes online next month. Charles added, outside the window, I saw Caroline Whitmore stepping out of a taxi. She visited her 2-year-old granddaughter every week, little Lily, whom we'd named after Elena. She still doesn't know the truth, I asked. No, and she never will. Charles stood up. She thinks we grew up and became real. I smiled. In some ways, that might actually be true. Uncle Richard had retired last year, never knowing that his investigation into me had been sabotaged by Charles from the beginning. The private investigators he'd hired all worked for us. What about Elena? Charles asked. Next week I'm going to Monaco to meet her. Tell her about Lily. The phone rang. Margaret Chen. Congratulations, she said. You just passed the 2-year mark. All clauses are now void. Your money is safe. But as I hung up, I realized the money didn't matter anymore. What we'd built, the family, the company, the future, that was what truly had value. Charles took my hand. So Mrs. Whitmore for real, ready to change the world? I looked at him, seeing not the manipulative Charles or the desperate Emma. Just 2 people who had found a way to love correctly. Always ready, Mr. Whitmore. But the question remained, could love born from deception ever truly be honest? 5 years have passed since that first charity gala, where I pretended to stumble upon Charles by accident. Not as a reminder of deception, but of transformation. Last month, Susan called again. Her tech billionaire had tried to pull the same inheritance scheme on her. But she'd read every word, hired Margaret Chen, and walked away with half his company. Thanks for the education, she'd said. Charles found me staring at the photo one evening. Regrets, he asked. Just wondering, I said. Do you think we would have found each other without all the games? Maybe, maybe not. He wrapped his arms around me from behind. But I know one thing. What's that? The woman I fell in love with wasn't Isabella Langford or even Emma Sullivan. She was the person brave enough to play a game she might lose, smart enough to change the rules, and strong enough to forgive. Outside our window, Manhattan glittered like scattered diamonds. Somewhere in those lights were other women like I used to be, desperate, brilliant, dangerous. Other men like Charles used to be entitled, calculating, trapped. The game never really ends, it just finds new players. But sometimes, just sometimes, the players find a way to change the game entirely. And that's when the details aren't just on your side. They become the foundation for everything that follows.